because we don't need to learn new things. We need to implement what we already know. And I just want to encourage all of the listeners right now to go, this is the thing I've been putting off, or I know this is going to help me, and actually do it.
Welcome back to the Own Your Awkward podcast. I'm your host, Andy Vargo, and every episode we get into what has made our guests vulnerable and how they've learned how to own their awkward in order to live their best life. Stay tuned so you can hear every awkward moment in today's show. All right, my friends, welcome back to another Own Your Awkward podcast recording. And I am super thrilled to have the mighty bold man himself, Mr. Brian Buck. Brian, how are you today? Thanks for being here.
Oh man, I've been looking forward to this since you invited me a bit ago. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Oh, this is going to be awesome. You're one of those people that we met we met at the Loving Workplace with Renee,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yep.
And it's just, you meet people just walking through the park at an event, and then you never know how you're going to connect and hit it off. And it's been great catching up with you for your Kaizen coffees and getting to know your network further has been, it's amazing the people that are in our own local communities that we don't even know. And you're a good example of that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's what I do love is especially because even though they're different communities, we all kind of have that shared purpose of being into people and uh, the human side of growth and change. So even though different groups have different focuses, that's like the commonality. So it is fun to find those like-hearted people like you.
Right. Yeah, I appreciate being included in that because we see things in others, which is always I think easier to find the positive when we're looking out. Hopefully, if you're in the right mindset. But sometimes it's like, oh, am I in that like category? Like that's cool. I want to be in the cool group, and I don't define cool like I used to, when I was in high school. It's like this is what makes us cool now is the people that are accepting and growing and working on self-improvement and improving the world that way.
Yeah. Well, you made me also think of something that I never thought of this before, but I actually thought it was brilliant. And so often we think about projection. You hear the idea that if someone's complaining about how you talk too much, they are usually projecting their own inadequacies of,
Mm.
hey, I'm sensitive when I'm speaking too much, so therefore I'm critical when I see others doing it because I'm critical of myself. I learned a while ago that that also works in reverse. Like when we find people we really like or we're drawn to, that we are also projecting ourselves into them. We're like, I'm seeing the things in these people, either things I recognize in myself or things I want to bring out more of myself.
Mm.
So when you talk about the community, I think that is really neat to be like, oh, wow, the people I'm surrounding with, these are people who are bringing out what I want to show up more often, or I could feel like I'm bringing that because I'm in that community.
I love that perspective because so often we get caught up in our head of, like you said, that inadequacy or that we must be missing that. And I heard a quote. I don't know. It was probably on some social media reel or something. So I don't know who to credit this to, but it was talking about the good role that jealousy plays
Hmm.
in that it shows us what we truly want, but might be not willing to admit. And it's
Wow.
made me think a little bit differently when I find a little bit of envy or something. It's like, oh, it's okay to know that that person has something that I'm striving for, as long as it's not in the really mean, spirited way.
Yeah. I think that goes into, does everything we experience serve us? Like if you make that choice, you could say, oh, this is serving me versus making the choice to be offended.
Sure.
I saw a quote, this is another social media. I wish I knew who said this because it was brilliant. But it makes me think of that is they said anger is natural, resentment is unnatural.
Oh, I love that.
And with that, they were talking about, say, you and I are going for a hike, as we often do, right?
Mhm.
And a bear shows up. Well, we're going to get anger because fight, flight, or freeze. That's going to naturally show up. But it changes when the bear is gone. And you and I are like, can you believe that bear ruined our walk? We're trying to do this and the bear showed up. And, like we hold on to things when the danger is gone, and
Yeah.
that is resentment. And
Oh, I
so
love that.
I kind of think about that jealousy thing. Like maybe at first you've got that fight or flight, but if you're able to go, oh, right, this is telling me something I want myself. Oh, maybe I want to lean into that more. Maybe I want to invest in a coach or help so I can bring that out of myself versus they've got it, I don't. Wah, wah.
Right. And how dare that bear be in nature where it
Right.
lives?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love
that bear's like, could you believe these two humans are walking around? I'm just trying to get my honey.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh, I love that perspective. And it does. It's a shift because we need to have permission to experience the emotion and the reaction uh that is a natural experience that's outside of our control in the moment, but then
Mhm.
also learn how to not carry it through the rest of our day.
Yeah. Yeah. Tony Robbins forever talks about, the person who cut you off in the road,
Hmm.
and you go and tell everyone, can you believe this jerk who cut me off and all this stuff? And they weren't even thinking, one, you brought that person the rest of your day. That person who cut you off hasn't even thought about you. And how much energy do you give to them? Or
Right.
the other side is, what if then you learned they were trying to bring a bleeding child to the children's hospital? Once
Right.
you learn that, be like, oh, I hope they got there.
Hmm.
It's we
Yeah.
react with insufficient information,
Right.
and it can really change our day. So.
Yeah, we
And that's
like
something as a, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say we like stories, and unfortunately, we're gonna fill them in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that was another thing that I've learned on my coaching journey is recognizing when we're reacting versus responding.
Mm,
Because we can react all we want, but then there gets to be a point when we get to choose our response. And one of the ways we could choose our response, going right back to what you were saying, is choose the story. What's the story we're choosing that's causing this reaction?
I love that. Yeah. So how do you do that when you're in the moment? Because that's the tough part. Like it's easy to look
Yeah.
back and go, man, you know what? I didn't choose the right story yesterday at 1 o'clock when some person who I'm going to give a mean name to cut me off. But in
Yeah.
that moment when you're getting cut off, how do you get your mind out of that headspace?
Yeah, I think you don't. I think you just embrace it. One of my
Mm.
favorite coaches is this guy named Kyle Cease. Have you ever heard of him?
Yes, I think you turned me on to him. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So he used to do stand-up comedy, and now he does transformational comedy. And he says, I want to be Wayne Dyer if he was funny. And one of the things he says is whenever we experience something that we want to judge as negative, we just say, and I love that. I'm jealous, and I love that. I am pissed off, and I love that. Because so often we just need, and this is another thing that I learned, emotions only last 90 seconds to 3 minutes if we express them and let them out.
Wow.
What happens is we feel anger, we go, I can't express it, I'm going to hold on to it. So then it just stays in our body. So we have like these residuals of all these things because we're like, I shouldn't feel anger, I shouldn't feel jealousy. But all that does is it stretches it out. And have you ever heard of the phrase, your issues are in your tissues?
No.
Yeah, so what that means is unprocessed emotions actually makes our body sick.
Wow. Okay.
And so because it leads to all sorts of inflammation, upset
Right.
stomach, headaches, all of these kinds of things. So back to your question, in the moment, react and love that. Let it loose
Hmm.
and recognize when the bear's gone, what's my response now?
Gotcha. Yeah,
And
the
then you
bear's
can
no longer
also
here.
learn, oh, what did I believe that led to that reaction? And
Hmm.
that takes a little longer time, but if
Sure.
you really do embrace everything that happens serves me, that guy cut you off because you would have been in an accident, or that person cut you off because you weren't present. You were
Hmm.
in La La Land thinking about things in the future. You were learning about the past. That person let you be in the moment, and that was a good reminder. So it takes some time to say, what if I chose this perspective in my life? That's going to
Right.
always help me.
I love that, and it's both letting go of the past, giving it its space in the present, letting go of it later, but still doing the work for preparing yourself to take the lesson from that into the future, so that the next time it's maybe you don't ruminate on the bear for 2 hours, maybe it's only 45 minutes, but it's an
Yep.
improvement.
Yeah.
Maybe you get to that point where that 90 seconds to 3 minutes and you move on and be like, yeah, you know what? Was there a bear? I don't even remember. I
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's also, as a coach, I always love to say, what were you really stressed and worried about? Maybe what woke you up in the middle of the night on November 14th, 20, uh, 2002. People are like, I don't know. Because with time, the things that drove us batty, we can't even remember what they are.
Right.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
know we probably have been wrapped up in those things. So I think
yeah.
as we do this chosen stuff, you remind yourself that over time, I'm not even going to remember this.
Yeah, that's a helpful thing too, because that's the missing equation, I think, so often in growth and healing and anything that you're trying to do where you're trying to make change happen. We forget that missing equation of time where, it's like you're working out and you're disciplined, you're getting up on time, you have the motivation, you have the discipline, but you're a week in and you're going, well, nothing's changed yet. I'm going to give up. It's like, well, you didn't give it enough time. And same thing with healing and with getting over things. We just need to wait through it while we're doing the work. But too often we're impatient by nature. And so it's like, man, it's been a week. It's been 6 months. This should be done. I should be a millionaire. I should have the body I want, whatever
Yeah.
that thing is. And it's, well, it'll come in time. And I hate hearing that because I am right there. Trust me, I am impatient. I'm top of the list, but we need to give that time.
When I first started consulting, I heard this joke, and it's appropriate to what you were just saying. And that says, a consultant will tell you, you just need 9 women to have a baby in a month. Right? Like that
Yeah,
would be their advice. And it's like,
right.
why would that's not the natural order of things. And
Yeah.
I,
And
and I think, oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead. That's yeah.
Oh, I just say too, and as you do things more and more, and as you're growing and transforming, you start to realize if you got things earlier than you were ready,
Mm,
it also wouldn't last, or
right.
it wouldn't be as good.
Mhm.
So you start to appreciate that time to bake, like 9 months for a
Oh
baby.
yeah, I can definitely relate to that because I look back at times in my early development of my career where I would be just anxious for a promotion or for more responsibility, and then I would get it and then realize like, oh, I'm in over my head, or how much harder that struggle was to adjust because I hadn't had certain experiences before then. And you have to balance that because there's always that imposter syndrome no matter how experienced you are, where you have to then go, okay, is this now I look at things much differently than, 22-year-old me. However, back then it was like the imposter syndrome should have been there when it wasn't, and
Right.
now it probably is when it shouldn't be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think too, especially if you rush things. Like when I got to be a quality manager and business manager, I had 200 people reporting to me, not directly, but I was responsible
Hmm.
for that many. And I remember being, this is what I really, really want. And after doing that 5 years, I found the job so boring
Mm.
because I realized the coaching and consulting where I was with new teams, new groups all the time gave me creative energy where being with the same stuff all the time was like, okay, I'm
Mm.
ready to move on. It's like the show Lost where the first couple of seasons are really good and then you're just watching out of habit hoping it'll be as good as it used to be.
Yeah. Wow, that's such a deep way to look at it too, because as you were saying that, I started reflecting on my own career, and I'm like, don't stay in the conversation. But I started thinking about that relativity of the times when I have strived for the easy and the I want that golden road of the show up at the job where there's not work to do and I just get paid.
Yeah.
But those were the least fulfilling times when I got to those places where things were on autopilot and we had the systems down because I thrive on the problems and the chaos and the solutions that we're able to bring. That's the fun part to me. And I remember a very distinct moment where I showed up to work thinking, everyone's bringing me their problems because I was kind of on a very integral team and I was a part who kind of touched all the different segments. And so I was kind of a point person for a lot of different areas. And I remember showing up thinking, can no one else function if I'm not here? And how come they can't figure these things out? And what do they do if I'm not here? And then realizing that's my job. My job is to solve the problems. My job is to bring the creative solution. And that's the part I like. So I got to stop griping about the fact that I'm getting that energy. And at the time, I didn't have the growth to see it as creative energy and the way that we would look at it now. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And I've
that's
met so many people who just want things easy. Like, can I just be problem free? Can I do all these? And even though we want that, we get bored really, really quickly because we are designed for growth. And when we don't grow, we start to die.
mm,
Parts of our spirit, part of our energy, part of the spark we bring to life. If we're not growing, we are withering. And I heard this once again on the unnamed social media, but it was we're at a privileged time in our life where we have to pay a gym to go someplace for resistance so that our muscles grow. Because in the early days, to survive, we had to deal with resistance, running, lifting heavy things. So
yeah,
we have to pay people to give us the resistance to get stronger.
to
It's just
recreate that.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So what do you do when you're in that space where you got 200 people working for you, thinking that's what you strived for, and you realize you're bored and you're missing the creative side? Where do you go from there?
Well, I was feeling it, but not doing anything
Mm,
about it. And it happened to be, and this is, I don't know if I got a chance to talk to you about this. So, a great way of sharing with the world, everyone, with you and the world. So, my workplace became toxic.
mm,
And it got to the point where my wife looked at me and said, Brian, you've lost your spark. And I didn't realize because I've been doing Tony Robbins stuff for years. I've got the mental conditioning. I can always find something positive. I
hmm
can be able to make things serve me. And I was at a complete loss. I didn't realize what was happening. With some deeper searching, I realized everything at that workplace was violating what I value.
mm,
And that's when you realize that's a deeper hurt is when something is going against your values.
right.
And so through that process, I ended up, well, I went to see a Pearl Jam concert for the first time. I'm from Seattle. Pearl Jam tickets sell out within seconds here. I
Right.
never gotten a chance, despite being a fan since the 10 album. And I
Not the
got to go
direction I
see
thought
the,
that story was going, but I love it.
oh, oh, yeah. And so I went and saw them on August 8th, 2018, and it was a spiritual transformation for me.
Mm,
I was in the middle of the toxic workplace and I went to see this band, which right when I went out of college, I worked at a place. Someone went and saw the Rolling Stones. And I was like, the Rolling Stones in the 90s, weren't they big in the 60s? Come on.
right.
So there is a part of me that thought, is Pearl Jam going to be a shadow of the band that I used to enjoy? Am I now one of these old people who likes old bands, even though they don't have it anymore?
Right.
The second song, or the third song they did was Release. And I chose at that point, I'm just going to release myself to this experience. And I did. And by the time they sang Alive at the end of the night, I never felt more alive in my entire life.
Wow.
And I decided at that time, I want to be responsible for more than 200 people. I want to have a bigger impact. I don't want my impact to be limited by just these 200 people.
Hmm.
And there I came up with this concept that I call the rock concert lifestyle. And I started to think about what makes this so special. And it was three things: passion, the audience, myself was passionate, the band was passionate, connection. We felt connected to the band. I connected to the people. I connected with my friends that I went with. I connected with the strangers that were there, and freedom. I
Mm.
felt more free in my entire life, dancing with lack of rhythm, singing off key to songs. Everyone there was really free. And I was like, this is the magic in the bottle that people want: freedom, passion, and connection.
Wow.
And at that, right after that concert, Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi, it was January of 2019, created this program called Mastermind. I think it's called Knowledge Business Broker. And it was all about how to sell courses. And I started to get really involved. So that really re-kickstarted my journey. And I created my business and kind of gone through different paths and different niches and just learned more about myself, did my own growth to get here. So
Wow.
that was a little bit of my backstory, but I bring it back to that toxic workplace because I learned two lessons. One, hurting people hurt others. Like, I realized one of the main instigators was someone who was just going through a really bad divorce. This person and I were both competing for a new director position, so they were trying to do anything they can to move ahead.
Right.
And it also made me realize, I wonder if that workplace was always toxic, but I had to be bored to recognize that it's there. Like, to a certain degree, once again, I didn't do this consciously, but the toxic workplace served me because
Right.
it helped me see it's time to move on. You're too comfortable
Hmm.
and you're bored as hell.
That's really astute because sometimes the environment was already there and we didn't see it until
Mm-hmm.
something jarred us or something changed us where we went, wow, this is how long has it been like this? And I've had those awakenings myself, and it's I don't know how you felt. It can feel for me. It felt kind of like foolish. Like, man, everyone saw this, and how come no one like hit me over the head and said, Andy, like, wake up? But I think we're not going to see that awakening until we're ready.
Yep, right, exactly. And people were starting to see it. Um, and it has been fascinating since I left how many people afterwards have come and just talked about what they've experienced in other parts of the organization. So it wasn't even just limited to my area. But yeah, I think it's, as cultures change, sometimes, well, I also learned this phrase because I end up getting recruited to another job, which was so good. And I moved into that and I heard this phrase of death by a thousand paper cuts.
Hmm.
And that is what that culture was, because especially for someone who's positive, who does all, who kind of knows how to reframe things in ways that helps me, it was like, I'm not going to make a big deal. That was a slight. I can deal with that. I'm not going to go to HR over this. This is nothing. But then all of a sudden you start to see, wow, I'm at like 500 of these already. What the heck is
Right.
going on? And you start to realize how it accumulates. So I think, yeah, for someone who might feel foolish about that, it's like, well, it just took you a while to feel the pain and
Right.
have it actually hurt, because sometimes resilience makes us stick to things we need to say, screw that.
Right. And that is a sign, I think, of your really good skill set of resilience and positivity and optimism working against you in that
Yep.
you're like, oh, you know what? Well, I can find the good in this. You're like,
Yeah,
not to go to the Star Wars reference, but it's just like, there's good in him. I know it. I can see it, no matter how much is going on. And he may have cut your hand off, and you're going, wait, no,
yeah,
this is still a good guy, right? I'll find
yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. I will
Yeah.
always take a Star Wars reference.
I had a hint. So,
Yeah.
so I want to hear about Mighty Bold in just a minute, but before we get to that, you may have already touched on this, but I have to ask because that's why we're here. So, in all of this, what is your awkward thing?
I think my awkward thing is I bring up elephants in the room without shame.
Mm,
I believe 100% in telling the truth as I see it. And I've gotten slack for it in the past. And I'll kind of do a segue. Have you ever done shadow work?
a little bit.
Okay, so shadow work is where you look at things in yourself that you either try to hide or that you're shameful of. And back in high school, I used to do a lot of theater and directing, and it's a strength of mine. It's a passion of mine. I'm excited about it. And I remember I would go into my fellow peer directors, watch what they do, and then give them feedback to help them. My girlfriend at the time said, Brian, do you know you intimidate people? And I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm trying to help them. But when you have a heart to serve, you don't want to intimidate people because then they're not listening and you're not serving. So for
Right.
years, I held back on that
Mm,
until I did the shadow work and said, hell yes, I'm going to intimidate you because I'm going to intimidate you because I love you, because I see there's so much more that's you're capable of that you're limiting yourself and you're holding back from. And so I read this great book by Joseph Kwan on how to bring up elephants in the room. And because that was part of my toxic workplace is I said, never again for me or others that I can help. And one of the ways to diffuse toxicity is you have to bring it out on the table.
hmm
And so I really learned how to do that. And then the job that I was recruited in, they did things that were completely against the very values of what we do in Japanese leadership in the Toyota way. And I was able to use those things that just, hey, I just want to talk about my assumption from my years of doing this. What you are saying is completely counter to that. And I just want to see, is that your intention?
Mm. It's a good approach.
And they said, yes, but we promise it'll only be this one time. Thanks for bringing that up. So
Mm,
at least I call this let people show their cards so you know what you're dealing with. But
right.
when I did that, three of my fellow coworkers came up and said, thank you so much for saying something.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my awkward thing is I'm totally fine with bringing up awkward stuff to let people show their true colors, go full Cindy Lauper, because then you know what you're dealing with. Then you can make a decision. Like, I think it's the romantic, should I stay or should I go? Like, all right,
Mhm.
show me what, if I bring up something that's important or it's against my values and you shut me down, I know where I stand with you. I now get to make a choice. Maybe I choose to stay, but I'm going to not get my hopes up. I'm going to know where you stand. Or maybe I use that as a sayonara. I'll see you later.
Right. At least then you leave on honest terms and
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Now,
so
now
yeah, so
when
I think that's my awkward thing.
I love that. Now, when you go back to doing the theater work and shadowing people and having someone actually tell you, do you know you're intimidating? Did you set that aside for a while then? Did you step back and hold back?
Not just at theater, but just in general, I would.
hmm
So, I reached out to a coach when I was at the toxic workplace because one of the things we did was Stephen Covey's Speed of Trust. You ever read that book?
I haven't read that one. No.
Yeah, great book. And in there, it had one of the ways to establish trust is to be a straight shooter. And so I brought up to this coach, I said, sometimes I find my straight shooter isn't always resonating with people. And I said, I honestly feel like I am being disrespectful
Mm,
if I don't talk straight to people.
right.
And so her coaching to me, which is really helpful, one, it's a great coaching technique, is ask for permission first. Hey,
Hmm.
would you like some feedback? Are you interested in an idea I have? So that is one way, because just straight shooting without permission does make me the asshole. So
We want to avoid that perception.
yeah, exactly. So okay, so that's a technique I can help. And then the second piece of advice is how do you like to receive feedback? Do you
Mm,
want it in writing? Do you want the sandwich? Good, negative, good, or tell me like it is. So if not only am I getting permission, now they're telling me the how. And
hmm.
then the third piece of advice is where do you want your feedback, or is there anything that you don't want me to touch on? So she was a facilitator, and so she was saying, I take a lot of pride as a facilitator in how I warm up rooms. And so if you came out there and said, boy, that room was so cold to you, she takes identity in that. I would be
Right.
insulting her identity. So that has helped me not be intimidating because I'm still serving, but it's giving me a filter in knowing where to go and what,
Hmm.
if they're not ready for it. Another thing I learned in my coaching journey is you are not a client, you're not a coach if you don't have a client. Even if they pay you, if they're choosing not to be a client or do the work, you're not coaching.
Right.
And so recognizing who's coachable and who's not, I don't waste my time with non-coachable people
Yeah. I think
because
we've
it's
all had that.
disrespectful to them. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I really love the perspective that you offer in that you shared for you, it feels like you're being disrespectful if you're not sharing the feedback, yet someone receiving the feedback, if it's not delivered correctly, can feel that they're being disrespected because you're giving feedback. And that's such a a, a truth to how perception changes things. And yet we have to step back and go, wait, where was this person coming from? And I love the examples you gave of asking for permission, finding out what's off limits, because I think sometimes in conversations we don't explore enough how other people are going to receive something, whether it's going to be respectful or disrespectful.
Yeah. Well, and I said too, is once you involve them in consent, then it makes it easier. I
Mm,
think the non-consensual speaking my truth could be intimidating.
sure.
Yeah.
So now you're coaching people. You touched on a lot of tips for us, and you talked about finding the right coaching people. Tell us about Mighty Bold. Tell us what you're doing.
Yeah.
What's the magic there?
Yeah, so it's called my program's called Mighty Bold Life. I um, I have group programs, but I find most people choose one-on-one, just because everyone's got their own journey. But what I have found is most people are in two stages. The first stage is they're unfulfilled, but they're not clear on what they actually want. And two, they know what they want, but they're not doing anything to go towards it.
Mhm.
And there's all sorts of reasons behind that. So my program really touches on four key pieces. Is one, your bold vision. What is it you actually want, and how do you actually make that come true? And we explore things like Do you feel worthy of wanting that? 'Cause like there's a lot of people say, I want this, but I shouldn't want that. Oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
bad of me to want that, or that's not for me. That's for someone else. Like, really getting into what do you actually want, and then let's figure out what's behind that. Or the other one is sometimes people want things because they think other people want them to want it.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what do you actually want? I don't want this because society would think I'm cool for having a jet ski,
Mm-hmm.
right? It'd
Mm-hmm.
be if I want a jet ski, it's because that's what I'm into. So yeah, so it's really helping people with that. And then the next thing is those bold strengths. What is the thing from both a somatic perspective, because and this is something that was part of my own journey. I'm more scientist, where I'm very logical in my head.
Mm-hmm.
And I found so many clients, their emotions were what actually prevents them from moving forward. So I went on my own journey and my own skills session to be able to really help people. And I've helped so many people since I've done this, is recognizing in the somatic senses how our bodies sometimes makes us do unconscious actions because of the emotions and the things that we stored. And instead of judging those, let's just embrace those and figure out how do you actually make your body work for you to go towards what you want. There's other skill building stuff on how to communicate boldly, how to stand up for yourself, how to actually make boundaries in a way that are respectful, because you can't get to where you want while being controlled by so many other forces,
True.
and
Yeah.
really helping people take that ownership, and then supporting people through bold action and accountability. So often we have great ideas that after a month fizzle away.
Mm-hmm.
So, the kind of support people need to help you go the distance, help you when you get the natural ebbs and flows so you get that done. And then the last piece is build a bold community, because no one succeeds by themselves.
Right.
So,
Wow. So
and
that's
so
the
yeah, so it
recipe for
really is a
success.
yeah, right. And it's kind of like, and that community piece that we met through community, the fact
Mhm.
that we interact with people who want to do amazing things for our community and in lives, it's a very different conversation than the people who are bitching and moaning.
Right. And that's one thing, it feels good in the moment. It comes back to that reaction you were talking about earlier, where for that 90 seconds to 3 minutes, it feels good to bitch and moan and complain and stay in that space and have people, oh yeah, you're right. You shouldn't have to do this or that. But it doesn't
Yeah.
change anything. It doesn't move the
Yep.
needle. And you're going to be there a year or 2 years from now complaining with the same people or new characters that replace the same people that are basically, oh, there's the
Yeah.
whoever. And
Yeah.
because
You
you
ever
don't take
follow
the
Cy
action.
Wakeman's work?
No.
She does this whole concept of the drama-free workplace. And one of the things she talks about that I love is she talks about venting. All's venting does is it brings up the same emotions but solves
Mm.
nothing.
Wow. Yeah, I was at a time where I was in a very toxic workplace and in a toxic marriage relationship at the same time. And I remember talking to a coworker who has become a really good friend, and just I remember saying to him at one point, I need something to be going well. Like I can't have this at work, and like I need one place to be an escape.
Yeah.
But I had been talking to him, and I remember I was reading this book about how we work and how our workplace is set up. And one of the lines in the book was talking about don't be the person who's going in and dumping on other people. And it really made me rein in, like, oh, I don't want him to not want to interact with me because every time he sees me, I'm like, I'm the downer where life's falling apart on every direction. And so I really had to be aware of, am I sharing in a way that's seeking advice to move forward versus am I just venting and dumping? And shifted our conversations just from me being aware of, okay, limit it and be aware, because you're going to lose the support you have by being that negative guy. But you're right, venting, it it just doesn't do anything to move forward.
Yeah, and sometimes it's okay, but once again, it's being aware. Like when I worked with my coach on the somatic stuff, I had a concern about um, working with clients who might have some trauma that they're dealing
Hmm.
with, and we all have different levels of trauma. And one of the things I've seen a lot of times is where they take identity in their trauma.
Yeah.
Like, I am this kind of person. I am that. Like,
Right.
when you start to add identity to external things that happen to you, that's a challenging thing to really shake.
Right.
And, when you want to help people, and her advice was, where they're at, maybe they just need to talk it out for a bit,
Right.
and they need
Hmm.
to say it out loud for themselves to hear until they're ready to move on. So I think, yeah, be aware of, who you're dumping on, but, maybe find a coach or a really good friend and get that permission. Can you just let me dump for a little bit without trying to get
Yes,
me?
fix right. Yeah. And that's true because that comes back to that element of time. We're all in different spaces and different levels of processing. And, I can't sit inventing for 2 years or 10 years. I'm never getting anywhere. But if I've got a process and like you said, the issues are in the tissues. I got to get them
Yep,
out, got to process that. Okay, now let's come back to the moving on, and that comes back to those things you were talking about asking for permission on, and consent. Like, do you want feedback? Do you want direction? Are you ready for that? Or
yep.
are you just
Do
in
you
the
want me to
state
hold
of
space for you?
coping?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. You also make me think of another key distinction that I think is useful to know. It is You're going to be more likely to succeed when you move towards something than away from something.
Mm.
And so when you think about how people frame their problems, they're like, I want to get out of this toxic workplace, or I want to get out of this toxic relationship, is very different than I want to work in a place that sparks my creativity. I want to work on a relationship that fires me up where I never want to leave. It's so fulfilling.
Hmm.
And oftentimes, and this kind of goes into some of the bold vision work, but I think it's also recognizing in their stage of where you're at and whatever you're dealing with, if I'm just like, I want to do anything out of this. But the problem is our brain, once we take like a little bit of action, the fear goes down and we think we're okay, but we haven't moved anything. Whereas if you really
Right.
know what you want to create, that keeps you motivated longer
Hmm.
to get you
Yeah.
through that. So,
Yeah, that's one of the phrases that I keep telling myself the last couple of years is don't celebrate too soon.
mm,
Because I tend to, you get the call or you get the opportunity. Oh, there's someone returned your phone call. I'm like, yes, someone returned my call. Someone signed up for a discovery call or whatever that basic step. But it's like, don't celebrate them as a client until they've signed the paper, or don't celebrate that you got the gig until you have the contract. And you have to be careful because you do need to be thankful and grateful and celebrate small successes, but not
yep.
to the detriment of moving forward.
Can I give
Um,
you a hint on that? That was
oh,
powerful for me.
definitely.
So this is something that I learned from Dean Graziosi, and I love it. And that is, let's say you earn $100 anytime someone buys from you. And if it takes you 10 calls before someone says yes, every call you earn 10 bucks.
Mm, wow.
So often we think of that last call as being the one that got the 100, but if
Right.
you're like, oh, I just made my first 10 bucks, just made my next 10 bucks until you get to that 10th call,
Yeah,
because then
I
you
love
start to
that.
see each of those as wins because they're all part of that process.
Right. I love that mind shift because you're right. We're not celebrating the one, and the one alone isn't what did it. And yet that
Yep.
might have been where the check was handed over.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know if people still know what checks are these days, but
Right. Yeah, exactly. Back
um,
in our days.
right. Now before we go, I got two last questions for you, but one is I tend to pick up on things and be intuitive, and sometimes to me it seems fairly obvious. But I feel like I'm like, I gotta lay it out clearly. So with your being the guy who's going to point out the elephant in the room, to me, it seems very clear why that leans into what you're doing with Mighty Bold. But can you just lay out how has that taking that thing that is awkward and different from other people been a catalyst for what you're doing today?
Yeah, I think it is. But my whole life, I'm an only child. I went to a private school where my friends didn't live next to me. So it was always like, oh, okay, you got to schedule and get a ride and all of these kind of things. And I only had like two neighbor kids around me that were my age. So I've always been independent and marched to my own drum. And I often have found in schools, like where groups were going, it was like those lemmings are going off a cliff. I want nothing to do with that.
Uh,
And and so for me, I've always had this independence of I am fine and comfortable and I belong to myself. I don't need other people's approval. So there's this woman named Carissa Kuches who once talked about something that I resonated with in myself, which is compliments or criticisms do not move me.
mm,
And there's so many people who want to avoid criticisms or who's like, I love the compliments. I love the compliments. But do we have that self-assuredness that regardless if those happen or not, you're still on purpose and going in a direction? So I've always had that. And I think that's something that's one of my unique strengths. And I see the lack of that being what stops so many people from finding and creating joy in their life or making incredible impacts. And I know it's just a couple of shifts. You don't have to be an only child without friends living near you to have this. These are actual skills that you can learn and put into place that
mm,
is going to completely transform because we are so much capable of so many things that we're not even tapping into. And in my experience, like bringing up um, the elephants, is you know how many people will thank you for stepping into yourself?
mm,
And
mhm.
actually boldly saying, I'm going to go for this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to say these things. Like kids and peers need to see others stand up for their boundaries or their values
Right.
to sometimes feel like they have permission to do it themselves. Someone has to go first. And so if I can help people be the first goers, the world's going to be a better place.
I absolutely love that. And it's so true. I know when I'm talking and I ask for people to share something, there's always that hesitancy and that fear. But as soon as someone breaks the ice, it's like the hands are going up and people want to share and they want to address things. But it takes that courage for someone to be bold and someone to make the first move.
Mhm.
So it's appreciated. How do people find you, support you? What's the best way for people to get behind what you're doing?
Oh yeah, LinkedIn. I'm actually Brian Buck on LinkedIn. I'm not a Brian Buck 0102. Full
Nice.
on Brian Buck, which is
Claimed it.
nice. Yes, exactly. It also tells you how old I am. And then I think just go to mightyboldlife.com. I'm still working on my website, but you get a good picture of it and you've got all my contact information there.
Perfect. And if you're driving down the road, don't worry about trying to write that down while you're listening. There's links in the descriptions. Come back to it and click on them, make it nice and easy for you. Brian, we're kicking off a new year here. What's just one last tip on a challenge you would give people on how to really step into their bold self this year?
All right, you ready for this?
I am.
All right. What is a piece of advice or something you already know that you believe would help make your life better that you're not doing yet?
Mm,
Take the
wow.
first step towards that. Because we don't need to learn new things. We need to implement what we already know. And I just want to encourage all of the listeners right now to go, this is the thing I've been putting off, or I know this is going to help me, and actually do it. And kind of related to that, I once heard someone say the reason why people aren't confident is because we break promises to ourselves. We don't trust ourselves.
Mm,
And
hmm.
so use this as an opportunity to say, this is a Tony Robbins thing. When I say go, I go. When you commit to actually doing what you know will help you, that's going to start to make your confidence go up. And you'll get great results because you moved in that direction.
Right. I absolutely love that. And I can relate so much because I mean, I could talk for another hour just about this piece of it because I know there's so many, and I will resist, but there's just so many times where I feel like I've chased that urge and I've watched other people chase that urge to learn the other thing, to figure out that other thing that's like something's going to be the key to fixing my issues or getting me more successful or whatever that thing is. And yet, like you say, we already know so much and we just need to act on what we've already learned.
Yeah. Did I ever talk to you about shelf development?
No.
So this is another Tony Robbins quote that I love that he talks about. So often we learn all these things and we just put it on the shelf. We don't use it. So it's like
Mm,
shelf development. We
right.
become addicted to learning, and many people hide behind learning. And I just want to encourage people time to stop hiding.
Hmm. I love that. I've gotten to the point where I'll even read a chapter of a book and put it down until I implement the thing from the first chapter. And it's like, I don't need to get through the book. I need to implement as I go and maybe not pick up the next book until I've done something from the last book I learned. It doesn't mean I have to have learned the whole book, but did I take
Yep.
a lesson from it and implement it? So powerful,
Powerful.
powerful lesson.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow, Brian, you have given us so much to think about. And I should have warned people at the beginning of this, sit down and be ready to take notes because every time we're together, I've got my notebook out here and I didn't do it today because it's recording and so I can go back and write them down later. But I always feel like I feel like I read a lot and then I still leave with 4 or 5 books that you suggest or ideas or concepts. And it's always like, well, now how did I not know that? Or I've never heard of this. And so it's just like when we're having coffee, very informative. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being on the show. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you. And everybody else, go out there, be bold. Don't be afraid to bring up the elephant in the room. And of course, own your awkward. Thank you so much for listening in for today's show. Be sure to visit awkwardcareer.com to continue your journey. And of course, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends so they can find their awkward side and learn how to own it.